This passage from Scripture is one of my favorites because it speaks in a very profound way to the topic of today about the ideal versus the real. In this passage, I see the ideal as God, or the concept of God, or the actual presence of God. But then also noting that this passage says no one has ever seen God. How do you make that ideal real? And the writer talks about loving one another, that very realistic point of person-to-person contact that is different than the ideal that is off beyond sight, beyond scientific proof. It becomes real in our action. But I think this struggle between the real and the ideal is something we deal with all the time. All of us have a sense of where things should be, but often that doesn't always translate into what is the next step. And today I'm going to contrast two phrases. One stating what I say would be the realist view, which comes from, not surprisingly, Voltaire. The perfect is the enemy of the good. And another one that's more recent comes from the business publishing book of Jim Collins, Good to Great, where he says, good is the enemy of the great. So the two phrases that I'm contrasting is that the perfect, the ideal, is the enemy of the good, and the opposite, that the good is the enemy of the great. Maybe it'll become more clear as I go on. Jim Collins, in his book, writes, "The fox is a cunning creature, able to devise a myriad of complex strategies for sneak attacks upon the hedgehog. Day in, day out, the fox circles around the hedgehog's den, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. Fast, sleek, beautiful, fleet of foot, and crafty, the fox looks like the sure winner. The hedgehog, on the other hand, is a doughtier creature, looks like a genetic mix-up between a porcupine and a small armadillo. He waddles along, going about his simple day, searching for lunch and taking care of his home. The fox waits in cunning silence at the juncture of the trail. The hedgehog, minding his own business, wanders right into the path of the fox. Aha, I got you now, thinks the fox. He leaps out, bounding across the ground, lightning fast. The little hedgehog, sensing danger, looks up and thinks, here we go again. Will he ever learn? Rolling up into a perfect little ball, the hedgehog becomes a sphere of sharp spikes, pointing outward in all directions. The fox, bounding towards his prey, sees the hedgehog defense and calls off the attack. Retreating back to the forest, the fox begins to calculate a new line of attack. Each day, some version of this battle between the hedgehog and the fox takes place, and despite the greater cunning of the fox, the hedgehog always wins. This parallel has been extrapolated to divide people into two basic groups, foxes and hedgehogs. Foxes pursue many ends at the same time, see the world in all of its complexity, and they are scattered or diffused, moving on many levels. Reality is complex, never integrating their thinking into one overall concept or unifying vision, such as an ideal. Hedgehogs, on the other hand, simplify a complex world into a single organizing idea, a basic principle or concept that unifies and guides everything. It doesn't matter how complex the world, a hedgehog reduces all challenges and dilemma to a simple, indeed almost simplistic hedgehog ideas. For a hedgehog, anything that does not somehow relate to the hedgehog idea holds no relevance. Princeton professor Marvin Bressler pointed out the power of hedgehog during one of our long conversations. You want to know what separates those who make the biggest impact from those who are just smart? They're hedgehogs. Freud and the unconscious, Darwin and natural selection, Marx and class struggle, Einstein and relativity, Adam Smith and the division of labor, they were all hedgehogs. They took a complex world and simplified it. Those who leave the biggest footprints, said Bressler, have thousands calling after them. Good idea, but you went too far. To be clear, hedgehogs are not stupid. Quite to the contrary, they understand that the essence of profound insight is simplicity. What could be more simple than E equals mc squared? What could be simpler than the idea of the unconscious? What could be more elegant than Adam Smith's invisible hand? No, hedgehogs aren't simpletons. They have a piercing insight that allows them to see through complexity and discern underlying patterns. Hedgehogs see what is essential and ignore the rest. So in the idea of Jim Collins, these are the people who have a clear vision, a clear ideal. And that in this vision, the good is the enemy of the great, in that people sometimes just settle for what's good enough and don't strive for that ideal. And they let all the complexities of daily living, all the excuses get in the way of ever achieving that ideal. They settle for being good and have no chance of ever becoming great. Now, the opposite is Voltaire. He said, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Now, if any of us have ever been in a committee meeting where someone has an idea and it can be tweaked and tweaked and tweaked until the idea dies. But what about this? What about that? What about this? We don't want to roll out this program until it's perfect. And thus it never gets rolled out. On a website, which probably all of us should read, but I'll leave that to Steve's sermon in a couple weeks from now. Get Rich Slowly is the website about financial information. This article on the perfect being the enemy of the good. And it really has nothing to do with finances. It just happened to be where it was located. I'm going for a walk, I announced to Chris at about 10:30 Saturday morning. Though it was cool and rainy, I needed some exercise, and it's been a while since I made my 3-mile stroll through the neighborhood. But before I could get out the door, I decided I needed to get warmer clothes. I went upstairs and rummaged around to find the perfect pair of pants. I sorted through my sweatshirts, looked for my favorite. When I couldn't find it, I had to settle for second best. I put it on. Then I decided that the wind would be too cold on the back of my neck. I just had had a haircut. So I pulled off my sweatshirt and put on a turtleneck, and then went out and put on the sweatshirt again. Now that I was dressed, I had to find my shoes. My lawn mowing sneakers were in the front door, but I couldn't find my walking shoes. So eventually I found them in my office, and I put them on, and I grabbed my iPod from the kitchen table. My gloves were there too, and I paused a moment to debate whether I needed them, and I decided against them. "I'm going," I shouted to Chris as I paused to check my email. The clock on the computer said 10:51. It'd been a half an hour. One message needed an immediate reply. I was hungry, so before I wrote back, I went to the fridge to get a snack. I microwaved some leftovers and then sat down to reply to the email. Finally, at 11:16, I left the house. I started walking downhill, and I realized I did want my gloves after all. I went back to get them. As I was leaving a second time, Simon, my cat, came up meowing to me. I went back to let him inside. It was now 11:20. It was dawned on me that I was doing everything possible to do to avoid this walk, so I procrastinated just a little longer to write down this list. Now, it took me over an hour to actually leave for my walk. This is dumb. I could have and should have simply opened the door and put one foot in front of the other and walked. The perfect is the enemy of the good when you spend so much time looking for the best choice that you never actually do anything. You are sabotaging yourself. Open the door, put one foot in front of the other, and go. So, here we've been presented with two pithy sentences. Good is the enemy of the great, and perfect is the enemy of the good. Good is the enemy of the great tells us not to settle for less. Always strive for the ideal. Perfect is the enemy of the good. It says do not pass up an opportunity just because it's not perfect. I think about my perfect world. There is no war. People treat each other kindly. Resources are shared. Everyone has enough, and nature is preserved. Criminals are rehabilitated. The sick get health care. Gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual, and transgender people are free to love whomever they love. Children are educated and cared for, and people are treated equally. Racism, sexism, heterosexism, violence, and greed are gone. These are a lot of things that I want. What if somebody who agrees with me on 9 out of my 10 favorite issues wants to work with me? Do I reject them because they're not perfect? If I am a pacifist, do I only vote for candidates that want to withdraw all our troops from everywhere? Is the candidate willing to make small steps towards peace worth voting for? Or will the world become satisfied with half measures and never reach for total peace? I believe in gay marriages. Can I vote for a candidate who only votes for civil unions? There is a purity of idealism, a righteousness from fighting for a higher cause. But sometimes purity gets in the way. Keeping one's hands clean sometimes allows things to get dirtier. That withdrawing from Afghanistan to pull my own ideas would be pure, that we just would not be the aggressors, but it might actually result in more violence rather than less. And so I have to put a check on my purity and look at that. The idea of praying, as their opening words were, sometimes can feel like a pure way. You just are stating your ideals out to the universe. It seems more holy than going toe-to-toe and debating with people and telling them that you disagree, because debating is difficult and uncomfortable. It makes people angry. But it also might change more minds than your private prayer. So sometimes I disparage idealism because it gets in the way of real change. Wishful thinking replaces good effort. And then my frustration shifts to the so-called realist, who only asks for incremental change. They caution that the world is not yet ready. They see reasons for inaction. Martin Luther King was frustrated with these people. He wrote, "On some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expedience asks the question, is it politic? And vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do so because conscience tells him it is right." King kept his eyes on the prize as he marched. He was not always popular, but he steadfastly lifted the ideal before us and energized people to take the next step. Maybe he became great because, in the terms of Jim Collins, he was a hedgehog. Every question that was put to him went through the lens of what is just. The purity of focus on that ideal made action possible. Sometimes we make things more complex than they need to be. King would have never been able to be elected president, but that was not his goal. Idealists often have to let go of goals that others think are practical. It was not King's goal to be in jail, but he managed to get there more than he wanted. But he was able to sustain these practical losses because he was focused on his ideals. The realist, on the other hand, tries to figure out what is the next practical step. Hillary Clinton took some political heat this spring when she compared King's idealism to the practicality of President Lyndon Baines Johnson. She said it was his ability to politic that passed the Civil Rights Act. And as a result, America now stands closer to King's dream. However, we seem stuck. And we have seemed stuck for decades. Those who are resistant to civil rights accuse progressives of playing the race card whenever we point out that things are still unequal. Was the civil rights a half measure that took us closer towards equality? Or was it something that got frozen in time and made people think, well, we solved racism in the 60s, don't have to worry about that anymore? Idealists often fail to see the reality of the complexity of situations, and realists cannot see the big picture. They can't see the forest because of the trees. It takes a special skill to be guided by one's ideals, yet realistic in one's approach. It means making each obstacle an opportunity. The idealist asked, where am I going? And the realist asked, what is the next step? I think both are better than the traditionalist who says it has never been done before. The traditionalist says, don't change, beware of anything new. They are satisfied with the way things used to be, fondly remembering the good and conveniently forgetting the bad. They resist change, though each day starts anew. The realist lives in the present, knowing that the good is mingled with the bad. The idealist eyes the future and heads towards the horizon. I think change is inevitable, so we must move forward and somehow keep one eye on the ideal and one eye on the real. One eye looks to the sky with hope, and one eye looks down on the ground to make sure we don't step into a hole. That's hard to do. One eye here, one eye there. And it reminds me of a song that Gail often cites as being sung in the first UU service about being a cockeyed optimist. And it comes from a play that she doesn't like, South Pacific, but yet she was a realist enough to know that this song contains something. These words by Oscar Hammerstein. I have heard people rant and rave and bellow that we're done and we might as well be dead. But I'm a cockeyed optimist and I can't get it through my head. I hear the human race has fallen on its face and hasn't very far to go. But every whippoorwill is sending me a bill and telling me it just ain't so. I could say that life is just a bowl of jello and appear more intelligent and smart, but I'm stuck like a dope with this thing called hope, and I can't get it out of my heart. So I encourage you today, whether your tendencies are towards idealist or realist, to maybe make your vision a little less clear, to be a cockeyed optimist with one eye on the ideal and one eye on the ground, making sure your feet are planted firmly as you go forward. As we continue to struggle with the idea of should we go for our ideals or should we take the practical next step? I open the floor to you and your ideals.
As a recovering perfectionist, I will tell you I've struggled with this for a long time because I have a lot of idealistic things that I've wanted to work for, and then I kind of switched back to being a realist. And now I'm trying to find that middle ground where I can keep my eye on the prize but still make progress toward that goal.
The late Dana Klotzel, who was a UU minister who died an untimely death some years back, was the director of the then Unitarian Universalist United Nations office in New York. And Dana had a definition of liberal ministry, which was this. He said, a liberal minister is a paid optimist.
Paid optimist.
Your sermon reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from E.B. White, and this isn't word for word, but he said, I awake each morning torn between the desire to improve the world and the desire to enjoy the world. It makes it hard to plan the day.
Let us now join in singing hymn number 95.